The girl passed out once a week, and the old woman beside her had been waiting for her for a long time. After locating the right place, she quickly took out a tube of an unknown liquid and stabbed the girl hard, but she reacted differently, and suddenly sprayed a mouthful of blood on the old man's face, and then the girl woke up and looked at the old woman in front of her, panicking, not knowing why the old woman was there, and then, seeing the unknown liquid on the floor, she tried to kill the old man. The old woman, Lisa, was a fitness trainer trained by the capitalists, and was well liked because of her good looks when she was young, but then something happened that made her realize the evils of the capitalists. When she was taking a break, she noticed that the women's toilets had been closed, and because she was fit, no one else was going into the men's toilets, and then the old man, Banshee, also entered, and said on the phone that he wanted to replace Rikishi, and the reason for this was even simpler, that Rikishi had been killed. The old man was no longer able to create any value for himself, but Rick Kill heard these words very clearly. After the old man had left, he dared to come out and look at himself in the mirror. He was very unhappy about growing old, and on the way home, when he saw the workers tearing off his splendor, he suddenly lost his concentration and was knocked down by a passing car. As he was about to get up and leave, he was stopped by a physician's assistant, who said that there was one more test to be done, and before he could react, he was dropped off by his coat, and after carefully feeling his spine, he was suddenly told, "You're a good candidate," and the assistant said, "You're a good candidate," and turned and walked out of the hospital. However, as he was walking out of the hospital, he suddenly felt something inside his coat, and when he opened it up, he found that it was a UUU, which was the name of the doctor's assistant, who was a good candidate. Apparently, it was the one that the doctor had just given him, and out of curiosity, Baijer opened the disc and the video inside indicated that he only needed to take an injection to change the cells in his body and they would continue to regenerate and conceive a new body. Face to face. This kind of indistinct words, Bailey simply do not believe that the USB flash drive as a fraudulent telecommunications thrown in the garbage that night. Bailey went to 98 to buy drunk under the stimulation of alcohol. Bailey even more hoped to see the young himself, so he called the biological company to order the product. No. After a long time, he receives a number plate, and according to the address he wrote down last night, he goes to a crude warehouse. Sister White opens the curtained door with a 53 and enters, and finds that it is a room for storing whites. On the 53 stick, he takes out a box, and opens it, and is greeted by a set of green medicines and needles with scissors, knives, needles and threads for suturing, and a set of extracting equipment labeled 1 to 7, a set of blood, and a set of blood drops. A blood exchange kit, 2 sachets of nutrients, and finally, what looks like a warning on a white piece of paper, one saying, "Have a cycle every week," and one saying, "Remember, you're the only one." All of this is a bit of an implausible idea, but in the heat of the moment, Ms. White injects an unknown green drug into her body, and then, in a fit of desperation, Ms. White collapses to the ground, and for a moment, she loses control of herself, and there's a ball of flesh on her back that scurries about. And then, in a sudden rush of blood, she falls down. Suddenly, a huge ball of flesh split open on her back. A leg came out of the big button. Finally, Bai's consciousness disappeared. When she regained consciousness, the first thing he saw was a pair of pink hands. He stood up and wiped off the mirror. Bai had finally regained her youthfulness. However, at this time, he should not be called Bai, but Bai. Bai had inherited all of Bai's memories, which meant that he was the other Bai, and it was only after he had admired her beautiful body that he thought of the man on the floor. He opens the tool bag and takes out the array of threads and sews up the huge gaping hole in her back, and then takes out the nutrient solution to keep her fit just as she's getting ready to go to work. He was ready to leave the world, but he suddenly felt dizzy and blurred, with a nosebleed. She hurriedly took out the instruction book and checked it out, and found out that she had to use Lisa's tonic water in order to live normally, and that a week of smoking would only last a week. When that time was up, it was time for them to switch bodies again, and the woman started to take over Lisa's life, and she also succeeded in interviewing with the same company, and gave herself a nice name, Teddy. From then on, Teddy's life was like a charm, through the careful packaging of the capitalist and her good posture, but the good times were short, and soon it was time for her to switch with Lisa, and she transfused her own blood into Lisa's body, and 3 minutes later, Lisa woke up successfully. She suffered from the pain in her back, and she looked at her young self with satisfaction, But then she disappeared from sight, and every day, she waited for the time to arrive, and then, when it was time, she was able to take over Lisa's life, and she successfully auditioned for the same company and gave herself a nice name. The time has come. As the 3 months passed, Teddy became familiar with the world and started to have his own independent ideas. On this day, after her performance, it was also the time for them to switch bodies, but he came to Lisa dressed up and said that he wanted to take up a little bit of his time, then went out for a night of partying with his colleagues, and finally brought the man back to his home. In the midst of the glamour, Teddy started to have a nosebleed and rushed to the bathroom to get some food. He rushed to the sanitary room to get a tool and sucked out a tube of Lisa's bone marrow without a second thought to prolong the time before returning to the man to finish the job. When Rikishi returned, he saw that the living room was full of garbage and that there was a note on the glass. When you went up to check it, you saw that there was a mutation of your finger. Suddenly, she realized what was going on, and when she saw the empty space in the back, she knew that it was Bai who had violated the rules. She called the merchant, but the merchant said that there was no way to reverse what had happened unless you don't wake up a new you. While Ms. Bai was in a quandary, the young Bai appeared in the TV, and he decided to wake up Bai for the sake of his own dream. On this day, when Ms. Bai was eating at a restaurant, an old man asked her if she didn't find it hard to go through these 7 days, and she looked at the number plates on the floor and the hair on her back. Looking at the number plate on the floor and the hairline on her back, she instantly realizes that this old man is the young doctor who warned her about the need for moderation, because human desires cannot be controlled. She hasn't begun yet. You haven't begun yet. Back at home, Ms. Bai decides to prove to herself that she hasn't been in love for so many years, and this makes her feel even more lonely. She recalls that she ran into an old classmate not too long ago, who has been following her on television and expressing his appreciation for her, and that she is still in the process of waking up. When he returns to the mirror, he is suddenly very tired of his old, decrepit self. He changes the color of his lipstick and prepares to go out, but when he sees White's huge poster, the girl in front of him makes him feel so inferior that he goes back to the bathroom and puts on a silk scarf. So he goes back to the bathroom, puts on a shawl to cover up his aging skin, does a reverse makeup, but all of this makes Sister Bai progressively more irritable. Bai wakes up to a messy house, he doesn't have enough time, and this old woman who spends her days watching TV or just blowing off steam, he calls the store, complaining and even trying to replace Sister Bai, and is so upset that he's not going to be able to do it again. When he got home, he found a bunch of containers, and he was going to extract all of Lisa's bone marrow before it was time for the changeover to extend his own time, but he forgot that Lisa had given him his life, and that maybe that's why you're never satisfied. Teddy wasted 3 months of his life, and that made him the New Year's Eve host, and the night before the New Year's Eve, he was going to extract Lisa's bone marrow again to extend his own time, just as he had done before, when he got a tube of black marrow. The night before the New Year, he was going to take out the bone marrow of Rexa again to keep the time as usual, but this time, a tube of black material came out, which scared him a lot. Jimang contacted the Queen of Life, but the Queen of Life told him that because he had been using Rexa's life to buy time, Rexa had not come out of the coma for a long time to grow a new bone marrow, and when the bone marrow collapsed, she could only be exchanged for another body, but on the next day, which was the New Year's Eve, how could Teddy be happy to miss the event? Suddenly, he started to feel uncomfortable and collapsed to the ground, and crawled towards Rexa. He didn't want to die, and the one who was exchanged for her was not the only person who could be exchanged. Lisa. He couldn't believe that Teddy had gone so hard, so he pulled him out of the room, and Jean-Marie opened the medicine that would stop Teddy's waking up, and according to the instructions, he installed a needle in Teddy's body and stuck it in the right place, and went to work. But as soon as the fluid was halfway in, he regretted it, because what Teddy was doing was exactly what he wanted, except that Teddy had done it for him, and so he went back to work, to finish the evening's New Year's Eve, but no matter what the night's Eve brought, it was not enough. But no matter what he did, he couldn't do anything. He suddenly thought of using his own blood to wake Teddy up. Jimeng transfused his own blood, and instantly, Teddy let out a mouthful of blood, and came back to life. But by then, both of them were shocked. Neither one of them passed out. Teddy was so scared that Jimeng stood up, but then he saw the middle finger on the floor, and instantly, he attacked Lisa, and she didn't need Lisa's life any longer, until he had killed Lisa, and then he was dead. and he had to be taken to the hospital. Lisa was beaten to death, but she had forgotten that they were a whole body. Lisa died, she had to die, and by the end of the night, which was the New Year's Eve, she was putting on her makeup and suddenly started coughing. She rushed to the bathroom, but suddenly something came out of her mouth. When she grabbed it and looked at it, it was a tooth. Immediately every tooth started to loosen, and then the staff knocked on the door, urging him to start the performance, but how could he be seen? In this state, he ran out. He ran out of the house. He wanted to go back to his home to think about what to do, but before he got home, his ear fell off. He didn't care what others would think. He ran to his home to find the remaining cosmetic fluid and injected it into his body. He thought that there would be a miracle, but surprisingly, after a moment of dizziness, something even more bizarre happened, which made him suffer immensely. After a 5-minute ordeal, the strange fetus was released from the body, and the baby was born. After a 5-minute ordeal, the fetus came out of his body, but his memory was still there. After dressing up, he came to the New Year's Eve party, and amidst the cheers of the guests, the fetus slowly came out, and when the lights came on, the guests could only see that the fetus was a monster.